We were all not here. I mean, I don't know how the oldest person in the room is. I might be that person. But really, we weren't here that long ago. We weren't here that long ago. And there were all these other people having all the same problems. And fighting and arguing and family tribulations and the liars and the cheaters and the righteous and the upright, the people taking care of the orphans, the people neglecting the orphans, the people causing the orphans, right? I mean, all this is dunya. And we're going to be gone. The Prophet ﷺ, he said that in 100 years, nobody will be alive on the earth. That's called the generation. That's the qarn. 100 years. Nobody will be alive on it. That's what he said. He told the Sahaba, in 100 years, nobody alive today will be alive. In Siraj al-Muluk, he said that the Indians, and one of the interesting things about the early Muslims is they quoted from India a lot. They had no problem with the India. They actually considered the Indians to have a lot of wisdom. And so they actually quote these great Hindu sages because they saw them as wise and they had things to tell us. They had no problem quoting them. But they said that there was a city in India where they would have a celebration every 100 years, where everybody would come out and the king would have them announce, is anybody here who saw the previous celebration? And only 1 or 2 old people would come up. They'd be like 110, 120, and they would come up. And then they would tell the people what they remembered, who was king, and what the people were doing, and and it was to remind them of this ephemeral nature of the world, that we will be out of the world soon enough. And so it's amazing. And then Qawmu Tubba are very interesting. He's only mentioned twice in the Quran, here in Qaf, and then I think in Furqan. Dukhan, yeah. So Qawmu Tubba are the Tababi'a, were the rulers of Yemen. So they called them Tubba, was like Qaisar, or in the Romans, they would have Caesar, Kisra in Persia. So the Tubba were the rulers of the Nejas in Ethiopia. They have different names for rule. Like here we call them president. Some people. They say he's not my president. Yeah. But anyway, here we have president. So the Qawmu Tubba were the people that were the people of Yemen. They're Himyarites. So the Himyarite are the brothers of the Kahlan. The Kahlan are the majority of Yemenis, and the Kahlan spread out. The Ghasasina and the Lakhmiyun were in Iraq. The Ghasasina were in Palestine. So the Arabs have been in Palestine long before. I mean, this idea the Arabs conquered Palestine and there were no Arabs in Palestine. The Muslims did conquer Palestine, but there were plenty of Arabs in Palestine long before the Muslims ever got there. So this idea that they weren't, and if you want a Hollywood proof of that, Ben-Hur has an Arab with the horses that he gives to Ben-Hur so Hollywood put them in there. That's a historical novel, Ben-Hur. It was based on historical, and they tried to make it as historically accurate as possible. So the Arab was there. So, they say, oh, these people weren't there. We're the indigenous people. No, there's always been Arabs in Palestine. There have always been Arabs in Palestine. And many of those Arabs that are now Christians, and if they do their DNA, they'll find Jews that converted. Because many Jews converted to Islam, many Jews converted to Christianity. So even the Semitic people there, the Semites were not blonde hair and blue-eyed. Those are called Europeans or Caucasians from the Caucasus. They're in the north because people where the sun is heavy, they're brown. And it's millennia. It's not going to happen like in 1,000 years or 2,000 years. I mean, it's not going to change. There have been African Americans here for 400, 500 years. They're still black. So the people that are in the Middle East, they're all I mean, Syrians are light-skinned, but many of them are Circassians. They're from the Caucasus Mountains. They're from those regions that came down. They were Turks as well. I mean, that's why when they started doing DNA, they found very strange things like the Iranians are more Arab than the Tunisians. They have more Arab genetic material in their DNA than the Tunisians do. So, but there have always been Arabs in that region. But Qawm Tubba, so Tubba was, his name is Asad al-Kamil, he's called sometimes, Abu Karib. This is a very interesting man. So about 700 years, so this is before Christ, about 700 years, he actually went out to conquer. Like he was a king, he had an army, he wanted to go out and conquer. They say he got as far as Samarkand, Allah Ta'ala alam. But in any case, when he went to Medina, and he had no problem with the Medinese. They were the Yathrib people then. So he left his son there as a governor. Well, they ended up killing him. So he set out, he wanted to destroy the city of Medina. So he went back to destroy the city. So he would fight them in the day, and in the nighttime they would send food to his army. So he couldn't understand this. You know, Suhaili says, "A'jabuhu," like he thought this was really amazing, their hospitality. And they were Abna'am, so because they're Kahlan and he was Himyar, so they're actually related from Saba bin Yashub bin Ya'rub bin Qahtan. So they're all from Qahtan. So he sent for some, and two Jews from Bani Qurayza came out, Ka'ab and Asad, and they told him, don't do what you're doing, because we can't guarantee you won't be destroyed because of it, because this is the muhajir of the last prophet. The last prophet will make hijrah here, and his name is Ahmad. And so Tubba was very moved by this, and the Jews explained to him their religion, and he ended up embracing Judaism. Because the Jews don't really proselytize anymore, but they used to proselytize. And many Jews in Arabia were actually converts. And some of them would swear an oath if their child lived, because there was high infant mortality rate, they would raise it a Jew. So there are Jews that were in Medina that were actually originally Arabs that became Jews. In any case, these two went back with him. On their way, they met some people from Hudayl who tried to convince him to destroy the Kaaba. They actually just wanted to destroy him. And so the Jews told him, no, the Kaaba is, Abraham built that. So he's the first one to actually put the kiswa on the Kaaba. And the Prophet said, La tasubbu Tubba. Do not curse Tubba. فَكَانَ مُؤْمِنًا. He was a believer. And in a riwayah he said, La a'rifu hal kana nabi. Was he even a prophet? So Tubba is a very interesting, but his people, initially they became, some of them followed him, and then other ones didn't, and they ended up being destroyed. But he was the one that spread Judaism amongst the Yemenis. And then you got Dhu Nuwas and Ashab al-Ukhdud, the story of the Jewish Yemeni who ended up, he's from the same group. He ended up persecuting the Christians in Najran and killing, I mean, they say 20,000, Allah Ta'ala alam, but and then Allah says, "Barhum fi dabsin min kharqin jadid." They're bewildered or mystified. I think that's the way Dr. Cleary translates it as. No, but they are mystified about a new creation. In other words, confused about it. They're bewildered by it. And then, وَلَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ وَنَعْلَمُ مَا تُوَسْوِسُ بِهِ نَفْسُهُ وَنَحْنُ أَقْرَبُ إِلَيْهِ مِنْ حَبْلِ الْوَرِيدِ. لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا. Verily, we created the human being, right? We did indeed create man, and we know what his ego suggests. So he translates nafs here as ego suggests. تُوَسْوِسُ بِهِ نَفْسُهُ وَنَحْنُ أَقْرَبُ إِلَيْهِ مِنْ حَبْلِ الْوَرِيدِ. And Allah says we are closer to him, to the human being, than al-habl al-warid. And so first of all, this is very important because it's letting us know, one, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows our innermost thoughts. مَا تُوَسْوِسُ بِهِ نَفْسُهُ. So this is what's called the hadith al-nafs. And it goes under 5 categories. So our scholars have very clearly delineated in the Arabic language the levels of thoughts. So the first ones are called hawajis. So hajasa shay. It's something, it's very fleeting, and you don't really, it doesn't settle. It's just a hajis. And the next one is called khatir. So a khatir is a thought that it settles, but there's no, it's not considered in that way. You don't dwell on it. You might have an insight, and then it goes. In fact, there's a great book by Ibn al-Jawzi, Abdurrahman ibn al-Jawzi, the great scholar and wa'il and muhaddith, called Sayyid al-Khatir, which is an amazing book. If you haven't read it, for some of the students of knowledge, it's really a very interesting book. But it's a book where he noticed that he would have these really interesting insights, but then he would forget them. He would think, oh, that's amazing, and how could I forget that? But then he'd find he forgot it. So he decided for 1 year to write down all of his insights, his khawatir. So that's the book. And they're amazing, because he was a great scholar. They're really interesting insights. So that's the khatir. And then the hadith al-nafs, which is where you begin to consider something. You start thinking about it. You think about the possibilities, the ins and outs of it. And that leads to hum. So the hum is where now there's really, it's something you're seriously considering, but you haven't set out. There's no azima. So the hum is something like the Prophet hamma bil hijrati ila Juwatha. He considered seriously making hijrah to Juwatha. And in the Shafi'i method, I was told this by Sheikh Abdullah al-Qadi, that the Prophet's hum is also a type of sunnah. Idha hamma bi shay. It's a type of sunnah. It's not just his azima, it's also his hum.